After 4 years of a writer's reclusive life and the forced trip to Asia in absolute solitude, my mind had finally lost all capacity for sanity. I didn't give up. I flew out of Russia, and that was probably the most important thing. Until the very last moment, I was convinced I would turn around and go right back home to my comfortable existence. But no. All my preparations had not been in vain, and there I was, standing in the Beijing airport. The 6-hour layover in Beijing lulled my vigilance like a professional hypnotist. Everything was going far too smoothly, unnaturally flawless for my first day in a foreign country. In the capital airport's terminal, which smelled of instant coffee and disinfectants, I staged a dress rehearsal for my survival. I pulled out my phone, opened Alipay, then WeChat. I aimed the camera at the black and white square labyrinth of a QR code at the counter of a small shop. A second later, a green check mark flashed on the screen. The payment went through. A bottle of mineral water and a triangularly packaged sandwich dropped into the plastic tray with a soft thud. My Kazakh card, carefully linked to the Chinese apps back in Rostov-on-Don, worked without a single hitch. I let out a sigh of relief, taking a sip of the ice-cold water, and thought with a touch of superiority, is that it? Is this what they were scaring me with on the forums? I'm a logistic genius. I flew to Shanghai, completely confident that this 4-month marathon would begin with a triumph. The plane landed at Hongqiao Airport on the 29th of May, just as the twilight was deepening into a heavy, humid blue. The air here was entirely different, dense, sticky, smelling of exhaust fumes and some elusive caramel sweetness of street food. The hustle and bustle of Hongqiao, this gigantic transportation monster where terminals, metro lines and a high-speed railway station, all intertwined, swept me up, deafening me with 100-voice chatter, the shuffling of thousands of souls and mechanical announcements in Chinese. I rolled my suitcase through endless glossy corridors, feeling my shoulders ache with exhaustion after the long hours of flight. But a fire of excitement burned inside me. I was ready. Right up until the moment a message from the apartment hostess flashed on my phone screen. Hello, please pay the remaining balance for your stay right now, so I can send you the electronic key and check-in instructions, the terse text read, followed by a heavy file containing a QR code. I stopped dead in the middle of the rushing human tide, pinning the suitcase with my knee and opened Alipay with a well-practiced motion. I aimed the scanner at the code. My finger obediently pressed the confirmation button. The screen paused for a second, spinning a white loading wheel, and then, instead of the familiar green check mark, a crimson alarming error window flashed. Your account has been temporarily blocked for security purposes. Please complete additional verification. Something inside me snapped and dropped straight into my shoes. A cold sweat instantly broke out on my forehead. Okay, quiet, don't panic, I whispered under my breath, feeling people with luggage carts jostling past me. There's still WeChat. WeChat won't let me down. My fingers began to tremble slightly. I scanned the other code there, entered the amount, and pressed pay. The system threw back a dry, uncompromising message. Transaction declined. Please contact your card-issuing bank. The Kazakh card that had obediently bought me water in Beijing just 3 hours ago had now turned into a piece of useless dead plastic. The security system had simply deemed a large payment for a Shanghai rental suspicious and completely cut off my oxygen. I stood in the middle of a massive alien terminal, without a local SIM card, with a minimal amount of cash yuan and with blocked electronic wallets. And I literally had no way to pay for a roof over my head. A wild, chaotic swarm of thoughts spun in my head. Where should I go? Who should I call? The clock showed it was evening. Exhaustion hit me like a lead weight, and Shanghai, which had seemed like a city of the future, suddenly bristled with millions of neon lights, turning cold, incomprehensible, and deeply indifferent to one specific foreign woman. The most terrifying part was that nobody here spoke English at all. The only sound around me was an alien, rapid speech in which I couldn't catch a single familiar syllable. I don't remember how I reached the terminal exit. I only remember moving in a dull, half-conscious daze, fueled by pure adrenaline. My ears were ringing. Taxi drivers were calling out. Signs were flashing past. But all I could see before me was a blank wall of broken technology. In a state of absolute shock, I practically tumbled outside, right to the official taxi stand. A short Chinese man in a uniform shirt appeared in front of me. I frantically racked my brain, trying to figure out how to explain where I needed to go when language failed me. My phone screen trembled in front of his face as I tried to show the address in a translator app. My fingers refused to cooperate, and the phone almost slipped from my grasp. The driver frowned, squinted at the characters on the display, and said something rapid and sharp in Chinese, shaking his head. Perhaps there was such raw terror burning in my eyes, and my hands were shaking so violently that in the end he just nodded silently, grabbed my suitcase, tossed it into the trunk, and threw open the rear door of the car. The car lunged forward, merging into the glowing multi-tiered ribbon of Shanghai's elevated highways. Futuristic silhouettes of skyscrapers, shimmering with all the colors of the rainbow, flashed past the window, but they felt like backdrops to some prolonged nightmare. I sat in the back seat, my fingers white-knuckled around my backstrap, staring at the back of the taxi driver's head. My heart was pounding in my throat. A single suffocating thought kept thumping in my mind. I am actually going to end up on the street. Right now, on my very first day in this insane city. About 20 minutes later, the car pulled up outside a tall, modern residential complex. I paid for the taxi in exact cash. The most terrifying part lay ahead. The apartment hostess, a young Chinese woman with a tired face, met me at the unit. There was no English here either. We communicated exclusively through our smartphone screens. The translator churned out clumsy, chopped phrases that only added to the panic. I frantically tried to explain the situation to her, while my hands continued to shake with a fine, non-stop tremor. She typed something into her phone, and the screen flashed the translation. Let's try a regular card through the terminal. The hostess brought out a small black banking device. It was a slim chance, but a chance nonetheless. I pulled out my plastic Union Pay card, issued by a Russian bank, and slid it into the slot. The terminal beeped. The small monochrome screen lit up with a field for entering a PIN code. Except there were 6 blank boxes instead of the usual 4. I confidently entered my 4 digits and pressed the green button. The screen let out a sharp, annoying beep. The hostess looked at her phone, then showed me her translator screen. Incorrect PIN code, please try again. I went cold. My own PIN code, which I had used for over a year, was being rejected by the system. I entered the same 4 digits again, with maximum concentration, my trembling fingers barely hitting the keys. We added the 2 coveted zeros that everyone talks about online. We tried them both, before and after the 4-digit PIN. Another rejection. The terminal stubbornly blinked its ominous message. Shock turned into a kind of stupor. I just stood there, staring at that plastic box, and felt a hot, angry tear of helplessness crawl down my cheek. This was it, a dead end. The real, tangible fear of spending the night on a strange street without a single yuan overwhelmed me completely. The hostess looked at me, pale, disheveled, with hands shaking uncontrollably, and dark circles under my eyes from exhaustion and the terror I just endured, and let out a heavy sigh, offering a small smile. She tapped at her smartphone screen again. The translator read, "It is already very late. You can barely stand on your feet. I will let you into the room for one night. Sleep, and tomorrow morning we will go to a big bank and you can try to withdraw cash through a teller." I could only nod. My throat was so tight that no words would come out. She said goodbye and quietly left, leaving me alone with my personal chaos. When the door clicked shut behind her and deafening, ringing silence filled the room, I dropped onto the bed, fully closed. I didn't even have the strength to cry. Sleep? Not a chance. Adrenaline kept surging through my veins, burning away the remnants of my sanity. The state of shock held me in a death grip, refusing to let me relax for even a single second. The thought that tomorrow morning this temporary respite would end and I would face the unknown all over again made my heart race frantically. The clock was already past midnight. I lay on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the glowing screen of my phone, furiously typing the same search queries into the forums of Russian-speaking expats in China. Alipay blocked Shanghai. How to pay for housing, Union Pay rubles. What to do if card doesn't work in China. I dug through megabytes of digital garbage, reading old threads and foolish advice, until a name flashed in some Telegram chat. Nihao.China. It was some new service app created specifically for tourists. The description claimed that the platform allowed users to link Russian Union Pay cards and generate local Chinese QR codes through them for domestic payments. It looked like a straw for a drowning person to clutch at. I had absolutely nothing left to lose. I downloaded the app. The internet, thank God, was working stably. The frantic, nerve-wracking registration process began. Data entry, SMS confirmation codes that took an eternity to arrive, making me bite my lips in anxiety. Finally, it was time to link the card. I pulled out my Russian Union Pay, which I had brought along more as a backup, dead weight for a worst-case scenario, and typed in the number. The system froze. A gray loading circle spun on the screen. I held my breath. I felt like I could hear the wall clock ticking away the minutes of my disgrace. The screen blinked. Card linked successfully. I jumped off the bed and quickly found the QR code for the rent payment on my phone. My heart did a wild flip. I opened the internal scanner in Nihao.China, aimed the camera, and entered the amount. My finger hovered over the pay button for a fraction of a second. It felt like jumping off a cliff into ice-cold water. I pressed it. The phone screen went dark for a split second, and then it turned a rich, incredibly beautiful green, and there was a large caption in English. Payment successful. I instantly sent the payment receipt to the chat with the hostess. Half a minute later, the phone beeped. A message from her arrived via the translator. "Oh, everything went through. Thank you. You are incredible for doing this so quickly." Slowly, very slowly, I lowered my hand with the phone onto my knees. The stress that had been building up over the last few hours, accumulating from the very moment I landed in this stifling, incomprehensible metropolis, began to drain away, drop by drop. It felt like breaking the surface after a deep dive, finally drawing in that first rugged breath of air. The tension left my body physically. My shoulders dropped, my fingers gradually stopped trembling, and a strange, cotton-like weakness crept into my knees. The state of shock, that dull mental armor, held on until 1 in the morning. The city outside the window had already grown quiet. The neon signs on the neighboring buildings had gone out, replaced by the soft, diffused light of rare street lamps. It was as if Shanghai had fallen asleep, having finished playing its cruel technological games with me. Only at 1:30 in the morning, local time, did I look around myself for the first time. The suitcase was still standing in the middle of the room, its plastic side gleaming structural loneliness. I let out a heavy sigh, got up, and began to undo the zippers. Clothes went onto the closet shelves one by one, and this simple, routine process of unpacking brought back a sense of reality. I was here. I had managed. I wasn't out on the street. My stomach let out a pitiful, loud growl. That sandwich I had eaten in Beijing felt like an event from some past, prehistoric life. I reached into my backpack and fished out a crumpled plastic container. A ration pack, what was left from the second flight. Some tasteless bun and a couple of packs of salted crackers. I sat right on the floor, leaning my back against the cool wall, and began to chew on this dry food, washing it down with the water the hostess had thoughtfully left behind. The bun tasted like the finest delicacy in the world. I looked out the dark window, where the contours of foreign roofs and distant bridges loomed, and the quiet, tired smile crept onto my face, all by itself. The first battle of this marathon had been lost miserably, but I had still won the war for survival on day 1. "Well, hello, Shanghai," I said softly into the emptiness of the room, blowing away a stray lock of hair that had fallen onto my forehead. 1-0 in your favor. But I'm still here, and we're just getting started. When I finally woke up the next day, the sun was already cutting sharply through the poorly drawn curtains. It was just past 10 o'clock, but the moment I tried to simply sit up in bed, my body instantly filled with a leaden heaviness. Right then, an absolutely clear, uncompromising realization hit me. I wasn't going anywhere. Not to some major bank, and definitely not sightseeing. The night before, Shanghai had drained me to the very last drop, siphoning off every ounce of my emotional reserves. And today, I desperately needed a break. I literally had no strength for anything. Even the thought of trying to decipher metro signs again made me feel deeply nauseous. I decided to stay in the room, get some work done on my laptop, and, if I could manage it, simply explore my own neighborhood. My apartments were located in a completely non-touristy zone. There were no flashing English signs, no crowds of foreigners holding guidebooks, just the regular, bustling, everyday Shanghai, built up with identical high-rises and crisscrossed by narrow streets. Wafting through the window was the smell of dampness, heated asphalt, and something spicy from a nearby local eatery. Later that afternoon, while lazily scrolling through expat chats between work tasks, I stumbled upon a piece of information that made my jaw drop. As it turned out, none of the previous night's nightmare had been my fault at all. There was no error, no stupidity on my part. The forum users explained in detail that many small vendors, local shopkeepers, and apartment hosts flatly have a restriction in their terminal and wallet settings against accepting foreign cards. When Alipay's security system flagged my desperate attempts to force a transaction through a place where this invisible block was active, it simply deemed my actions a suspicious hacker attack and locked down the account, which meant I had received that paralyzing ban over absolutely nothing, just out of my own inexperience, from a total ignorance of internal Chinese nuances that no one had bothered to warn me about. A strange mix of resentment and colossal relief washed over me at the thought. I wasn't an idiot. I had done everything right. Shanghai had just decided to test my resolve in its own twisted way. Looking back at it all now, sitting on my suitcases on this very last day of my stay in Shanghai, I view that crazy night through an entirely different lens. And, as bizarre as it sounds, I am profoundly grateful for everything that happened. That brutal, merciless glitch in the Matrix tore off my rose-colored glasses from the very first second. If everything had gone smoothly, I would have remained a coddled tourist, convinced that technology would solve every problem for me. This experience proved the ultimate truth to me. I know how to cope. In a foreign country, without the language, without data, on the absolute verge of panic. I didn't break down, I didn't curl up in a corner. I found a loophole, dug up the right app, and saved myself. Shanghai handed me an entrance bill, and I paid it in full, earning a cast-iron confidence in my own strength for all the remaining months of the journey ahead. May 31st began with the feeling of making a parachute jump that I had packed myself, on my knee, in total darkness. After yesterday, which I spent at a normal, measured pace, simply resting in the apartments, getting some work done, and quietly strolling around my non-touristy neighborhood, my strength had fully returned. Along with it came a itching, restless excitement. Shanghai no longer terrified me. I desperately wanted to push beyond its boundaries. My goal for the day was Hangzhou, or more accurately, two completely different points: the legendary West Lake and one foolish, irrational, and childishly stubborn dream of mine. I didn't even know why myself, but I wanted to see Paris in miniature so badly. The famous Tianducheng residential complex, where an exact replica of the Eiffel Tower towered in the middle of Chinese landscapes. This fixation had settled in my head back in Rostov. Since my mind had finally lost all capacity for sanity, why not start the summer with the Eiffel Tower, a 1-hour train ride away from Shanghai? Traveling on the Gaotie high-speed train from Hongqiao railway station on my own was a whole separate quest. The massive station resembled a spaceport from sci-fi movies. Millions of people, security checks, and giant displays. Inside, everything still squeezed a bit from the fear of being left in front of a blocked screen again. But the Nihao.China app and WeChat, my ultimate savior after the Alipay ban, worked like clockwork. In for a penny, in for a pound, I decided, and bought a business class ticket. When I sank into the massive, soft, and comfortable seat of the snow-white train, flying at 300 kilometers per hour, it took my breath away. In this quiet, secluded part of the carriage, passengers were handed neat boxes with Chinese snacks, nuts, and tea. Outside the window, green hills and bamboo groves flashed past at an insane speed. The velocity was lulling, blurring the boundaries of reality. I was traveling toward my own little personal victory. Arriving in Hangzhou, I decided not to waste time and head straight to my main target, to Paris. Right outside the station, I opened the Didi app to call a taxi. My fingers were still subconsciously rushing from the stress I'd endured, and as I hastily scrolled through the interface with Chinese characters, I accidentally tapped the wrong option and ordered a business class car. When a sleek black premium tier automobile smoothly pulled up to the curb, I just smiled to myself. Well, since I had started this day with comfort on the train, I might as well roll up to my fake Parisian dream in a matching style. The drive to Tianducheng took quite a while. The further we drove from the center, the more the landscape shifted, until the outlines of Haussmann-style facades wrought iron balconies, and neat alleys suddenly began to emerge from the typical Chinese architecture. It looked like a surreal dream come to life, empty European architecture in the middle of China. The car came to a stop by the square. I stepped out onto the street, greedily staring down the perspective of the French boulevard. There it was, the replica of the Eiffel Tower, soaring over the green lawns. My heart beat faster. I took a few steps forward, already anticipating how I would walk up to this iron colossus, how I would touch its pillars, and then my gaze hit the blank grey construction fence. The entire path to the tower, the whole square in front of it, was completely cordoned off. Featureless warning signs in Chinese and stretched ribbons decorated the iron sheets. There were no loopholes. The tower was right in front of me, its lattice spire cutting through the stifling sky, but approaching it was physically impossible. Renovation. I stopped before that fence, feeling a dull disappointment spread inside me. To travel all this way, overcome the fear of a strange metropolis, ride in a business class train, and accidentally splurge on a premium taxi for the sake of an illusion, only to face a construction fence. For a second, a hot lump of resentment rose in my throat. But I looked up at the fake Parisian peak gleaming under the scorching sun, and suddenly laughed quietly. The wind stirred the strands of hair on my forehead. There wasn't a single tourist around. There was a unique, special magic in that moment. Yes, the path was closed. The perfect shot hadn't happened. But the most important thing had already occurred. I was standing here, by myself, deep in China, a place I had been afraid to even think about visiting just 2 days ago. I had managed to get here, navigating by intuition and WeChat. The tower behind the fence wasn't a defeat. It was my personal monument to perseverance. I pulled out my phone and took a photo. The tower, the grey barrier wall, and a patch of bright sky. A photograph about how the journey matters more than the destination. The driver of my business taxi, who had been waiting patiently nearby the entire time, saw me standing there at a loss before the closed fence and understood everything without a word. I returned to the cool interior of the car, updating the route in the app. We had a long drive back ahead of us, through the stifling city toward the second part of my plan, the famous West Lake. This same car and the exact same driver were now carrying me away from the failed Paris, returning me to the real ancient China. Hangzhou greeted me with a dense, suffocating heat. Once I found myself on the shores of the lake, I could finally breathe a sigh of relief. It was truly beautiful. A classic Chinese landscape shrouded in haze, sprawling willows leaning toward the water, graceful pagodas on distant hills, and boats gliding noiselessly across the mirror-like surface. I walked by the water for a long time, catching rare gusts of cool wind and finally letting go of the remaining travel stress. The authentic, ancient beauty of this place helped me recover after the urban madness of Shanghai. And in the evening, the return journey awaited me. The station again, the smoothly functioning WeChat again, and the soft, deep seat in the business class of the high-speed train rushing me back to Shanghai. I sat in the dim light of the carriage, watching the scattered lights of night cities flash past the window, and a tired smile crept onto my face all by itself. The first battle of this marathon had been lost miserably, but I had still won the war for survival in the first few days. The next day brought me back into a work routine, intense, tight, and almost hypnotizing. From early morning, I buried myself in files, editing videos, reviewing terabytes of footage, building timelines and mixing audio. Outside the window, Shanghai lived its deafening, business-driven life, with millions of people rushing somewhere along multi-tiered elevated highways, while inside my apartments, I fought my own prolonged battle with scripts. After the stress of the first days, after all those blocked cards and locked gates, the understandable, controllable routine of video editing became the best medicine. When you control every edited frame, when the turn of the story on the screen depends on your single click, a sense of control over your own life subconsciously returns to you. I cut footage, applied transitions, leveled audio frequencies, and worked until deep darkness, pushing myself to the absolute limit. I intentionally overloaded my brain because I knew the next day I would completely free myself. I would give a gift to that little girl inside me, who once in Rostov-on-Don didn't even dare to dream of what lay ahead. And the next day was Disneyland. This day began with another important, almost sacred step, my first independent trip on the Shanghai metro. After all the panic-fueled fears of the local transport monster that had almost crushed me at Hongqiao, descending underground felt like a challenge. But reality turned out to be surprisingly friendly, clear, and understandable. WeChat came to the rescue again, becoming my main digital guide. I simply opened the built-in transport mini program, a couple of clicks, and the necessary QR code generated on the screen. I held my phone up to the glossy scanner at the turnstile, a short electronic beep sounded, and the gates obediently swung open. The metro station itself amazed me with its sterile cleanliness, vast spaces, and intuitively clear navigation in English. I stepped into a spacious air-conditioned carriage. The glossy futuristic train started moving almost silently, carrying me line by line through transfers further and further from the center to the very edge of the metropolis, to the final station, Disney Resort. As we approached our destination, the demographic in the carriage shifted. Instead of solemn office workers in white shirts, the space filled with families with children, young Chinese women with funny Mickey Mouse ear headbands on their heads, and cheerful groups of teenagers. The tension that had held me for the past few days finally melted away, replaced by a light, tickling sense of anticipation. When the carriage doors opened at the terminal station and I stepped onto the platform, the air around me seemed to change. It no longer smelled of exhaust fumes and the heated asphalt of business-centric Shanghai. It was infused with the sweet aroma of popcorn, caramel, and that elusive, intoxicating feeling of a holiday that only happens in childhood. Shanghai Disneyland greeted me with grand scales, a deafening cacophony of voices and vibrant colors. But the most surprising thing was that I went there completely independent of the extreme rides. I wasn't interested in the miles-long lines for roller coasters, the famous futuristic Tron, or complex high-tech simulators. The day before, I had had my fill of adrenaline in real life, so I didn't want to waste energy on artificial fear. I came here exclusively for the atmosphere. I needed magic in its pure, pristine form. I walked slowly down the main avenue, past gingerbread-style Victorian houses, past bakeries wafted in vanilla, and huge souvenir shops packed with plush toys. From speakers hidden in the greenery, familiar childhood music themes from classic animated films flowed softly. Each melody triggered a chain reaction of memories, and when the majestic spires of that very same huge, iconic castle suddenly rose ahead, above the neatly trimmed treetops, something inside me just turned upside down. The next day locked me within the four walls of the apartments again, returning me to a familiar, intense work routine. From early morning, I buried myself in files, completely immersed in editing and reviewing footage. When you sit for hours in front of a laptop screen, aligning frames and cleaning up audio, time flies by unnoticed. By evening, my head was buzzing from information overload, and my stomach was loudly demanding real food. I wanted something special, and after looking through recommendations, I stumbled upon the immersive restaurant Taste of China. The reviews promised not just a dinner, but a full theatrical show, so I decided, I'm going. I chose to get to the place by metro. The Shanghai subway during rush hour is a spectacle in its own right. Massive streams of people moved with the precision of a Swiss clockwork mechanism. I confidently tapped my phone against the turnstile. WeChat beeped predictably, opening the way for me, and the futuristic train swept me into the depths of the evening metropolis. Watching the glossy stations flash past the window, I caught myself thinking that this city was gradually ceasing to terrify me. I was beginning to catch its internal rhythm. When I finally reached Taste of China, I realized I had stepped into a completely different reality. There was no menu in the traditional sense of the word, no choice of dishes, no waiters taking individual orders. The concept of the place simply did not allow for it. You buy a ticket for a fixed gastronomic set, take your seat in a hall resembling an ancient Chinese theater, and completely entrust yourself to the hands of the chef and the director of the evening. The food here is part of the script. The moment the performance began, the lights in the hall went out, and the space filled with the deep, vibrating thunder of traditional drums. Right between the rows, almost brushing the guests with the long sleeves of their silk costumes, the artists soared out. A large-scale show program began, where each act was tied to the serving of a specific dish. The main shock was the famous Sichuan Bian Lian show, the art of instant face changing. The actor in gold embroidered robes moved with an incredible, lightning-fast plasticity. He swirled, made sharp gestures with the fan, and every time his hand touched his face, for a fraction of a second, the mask on him changed. Just a moment ago, a fierce red face of a mythical warrior was staring at me. A blink of an eye, and the smiling green spirit mask was already in front of the table. Another wave, and it turned yellow. I sat there, literally with my mouth open in amazement, trying to spot the trick from arm's length, but the magic remained flawless. In parallel with the changing acts on the stage, traditional dishes appeared synchronously on the table. From scorching Sichuan specialties to refined Cantonese appetizers. The waiters moved like a single choreographic ensemble, resetting the tables exactly to the beat of the music and theatrical actions. The live sound of ancient string instruments, the shouts of the actors, the trail of exotic spices, and the continuous shift of images around created a total sense of cinematic surrealism. I was sitting in the heart of China, watching this crazy riot of colors and ancient traditions, and a concentrated happiness was spreading inside me. That very taste of China turned out to be exactly like that. Vibrant, deafening, giving you no choice, but incredibly fascinating. When I returned to the apartments late at night, the crimson reflections of the restaurant masks were still lingering before my eyes. Shanghai had turned everything upside down once again, but this day could definitely be written into the list of my victories. The next day was completely dedicated to work again. It was that exact kind of conscious, deep escape into creativity where the real world outside the computer screen simply ceases to exist. From early morning, I was editing, aligning frames, rewriting pieces of text, and mixing audio tracks, hour after hour, without breaks or pauses. At some point, this frantic working rhythm caught me in its tracks, and I simply stopped noticing the time. Outside the window, Shanghai rumbled, melted from the daytime heat, and shifted its daytime bustle to evening neon twilights, while I kept sitting there, stubbornly bringing every frame and every line to perfection. I intentionally drained myself dry because I knew this final working sprint was the price of my complete freedom for the next day, a day that I decided to give entirely and completely to Shanghai. And the next day began with a long, unhurried walk through the city. After a multi-day marathon of work deadlines, foreign provinces, and closed fences, I was finally in no hurry. I just walked on foot through the streets, letting the metropolis lead me along. Shanghai revealed itself to me, layer by layer. Modern, mirrored high-rises suddenly gave way to the shady platanus alleys of the former French concession, where tiny coffee shops smelled of fresh pastries and good espresso. Ancient low-rise houses with tiled roofs and laundry drying right on narrow balconies peacefully coexisted here with conceptual boutiques. I walked, absorbing this unique contrast, and for the first time in the entire period, I felt not like a terrified foreigner, but like an organic part of this gigantic living anthill. Local markets, the quiet chatter of local elderly people playing mahjong in the shade of public gardens, the sharp smells of street food, all of this no longer deafened me. The city had finally let me under its skin. Closer to evening, my steps led me to the famous Bund. By this moment, the sun had already begun to tilt toward the horizon, painting the Huangpu River stretching ahead in heavy, golden crimson tones. The Bund greeted me with the majestic architecture of the colonial era. Massive granite buildings of old banks and trading houses froze on the left bank, silently keeping the history of the past century. And on the opposite bank, in the Pudong district, the fantastic broken silhouettes of skyscrapers soared into the sky, as if stepping off the pages of cyberpunk novels. The final chord of this day was an evening river cruise. When I stepped onto the deck of the cruise boat, dusk had already completely settled over Shanghai. A dull warning horn sounded. The vessel smoothly pushed off from the pier and settled on its course, cutting through the dark, oily surface of the Huangpu. And at that very split second, the city behind me literally exploded with millions of lights. the futuristic illumination of Pudong flashed. The Oriental Pearl TV tower shimmered with all shades of purple and pink. The giant media facades of the high-rises turned into moving live canvases, and the austere historical buildings of the Bund were painted in a warm, solemn gold. I stood right by the railing, putting my face to the cool, humid river wind. Around me, people were talking excitedly. Phone screens were flashing. But for me, all this noise receded into the background. The boat moved slowly, gently swaying on the waves, and the greatest urban backdrop in the world was unfolding before my eyes. Two banks, two completely different eras. The grim past and the bold, shining future swam toward me, reflecting in the black water in endless neon serpents. And right there, in the middle of this shining river, an absolute, ringing tranquility finally washed over me. The stress of the first crazy 24 hours, the panic from blocked wallets, the fear of the language barrier and loneliness in a foreign country, all of this finally melted away, giving way to a pure, deep pride. I remembered myself a few days ago, the confused, pale girl in the Hongqiao terminal with trembling hands. And I looked at myself now, calmly standing on the deck in the very heart of this incredible metropolis. I hadn't just survived, I had mastered this rhythm. "Well, Shanghai," I said softly aloud, and the river wind instantly carried my words away into the darkness. "We are even. You are beautiful, and I'm glad we met." The next day locked me within the four walls again, returning me to a familiar, intense work routine. However, today was not just a routine stitching of frames. From early morning, I buried myself in files, combining the active editing of video material with the deep planning of my future book. Before my eyes on the laptop screen, terabytes of Shanghai footage alternated with open text documents where I built the structure of chapters, wrote out the logic of character development, and polished plot lines. My book is a fictional world, but it was precisely here, in Asia, that it began to take on real flesh and blood. Shanghai, with its crazy mixture of futurism and ancient traditions, involuntarily threw at me the right metaphors, details, and moods. I cut video, applied transitions, leveled audio tracks, and in the intervals between video renderings, frantically jotted down new ideas in my drafts. By evening, when the first neon signs lit up outside the window, my head was literally buzzing from an overload of images. But a feeling of unmatched creative triumph burned inside. It was a day of incredible mental productivity that finally grounded me and returned a sense of absolute control over my own life. The next day became the final, deeply resonant chord of my Shanghai marathon. In the morning, I sat down to work again, systematically closing out the final work tasks and rendering the remaining video cues. Once the laptop was shut, the inevitable and always slightly heavy moment arrived, packing the suitcase. I neatly arranged clothes on the shelves of the travel bag, organizing equipment, wires, and notes. This simple routine process of domestic arrangement, which just a few days ago had returned a sense of reality to me when everything was falling apart, now marked the end of the very first chapter of my big journey. The suitcase zipped up with a sharp whoosh, its plastic side gleaming structurally by the door. I had managed to secure a few free hours in reserve before my scheduled night departure. Before heading out for the main, highly anticipated excursion of this evening, I decided to just walk around the neighborhood of my district one last time. This was the exact non-touristy district that on my first day had met me with a blank wall of technological and linguistic misunderstanding. Now, it felt almost like home. I walked along the familiar narrow streets, past the towering identical residential high-rises, deeply absorbing the sense of heated asphalt, humid summer air, and the sharp, savory spices wafting from local Chinese eateries. The local elderly people were still lazily playing mahjong in the shade of public gardens, and street vendors called out to rare passers-by with rhythmic, familiar intonations. None of this intense bustle deafened me anymore. I caught myself realizing that I was walking with a light, entirely confident smile. I had successfully learned how to breathe in unison with this city. And when it grew completely dark, I headed toward my final destination, the legendary Yu Garden. A night walk through Yuyuan is a completely different dimension, entirely distinct from the frantic, crowded energy of daytime tourist excursions. The exact moment I crossed the border of the historical complex, modern Shanghai with its mirrored skyscrapers and sleek financial centers seemed to dissolve completely into thin air. In the darkness, the ancient garden of happiness turned into a living, breathing fairy tale, flooded with the warm, solemn gold of traditional architectural illumination. The graceful, elegantly curved roofs of old pagodas, dark wooden galleries, and intricately carved stone bridges over the dark, mirror-like surface of the ponds looked incredibly majestic. Every single detail of this historic ensemble, lit from below with soft, dramatic lights, felt like an intentional backdrop to an epic historical film. I walked slowly through the maze of labyrinthine passages and hidden courtyard doorways, listening closely to the quiet rustle of leaves and the distant rhythmic splashes of water. In the deep crimson reflections of the traditional Chinese lanterns, the garden seemed mysterious, profound, and ancient. Here, surrounded by centuries-old silence and a past frozen beautifully in stone, all the chaotic storms, stresses, and anxieties of my first days finally settled. Shanghai, which at first had appeared to me as a cold, indifferent robot bristling with millions of neon lights, finally opened its true soul to me at parting, perceptive, wise, grounded, and infinitely beautiful. And now, a new chapter. A breath of fresh air after the neon madness and technological jolts of the metropolis. After Shanghai, I am officially opening a week of absolute rest, contemplation, and rebooting in Busan. This is a time to slow down, wash away the travel tension of the first days, and just listen to the sound of the surf, gathering my thoughts before the next big sprint. Shanghai taught me how to survive in the chaos, but Busan, it seems, was created to teach me how to breathe all